Bum 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 beam bum bum beam bum bum. I ding 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 ding. Ay 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 ding 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 ding. Oh ding 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 ding. La li ding 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 bum 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 bum. I ding. Oh, ya, Maya, Maya, Mamma, dum. Oh, dum, da, 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 da. I, da, 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 ya, ya, ya. Ba, da, da, la, la, da, la, la, da, 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 la. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, da, 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 la, ya, mom. Ayam, ayam, ayam. So we can continue Be'ezrat Hashem to learn for the refuah shlema of Chaim Menachem Ben Leah, Reb Chaim Kramer. We got to keep on storming Shemaim with our tefillas, with our love, with our, per his request, rikudim and nigunim and mamash our simcha. And tonight's shir is it's a real exciting one, if you ask me. I be very careful when I say that, because sometimes when I say anything exciting about the shir, they become the most puzzling. So I'm saying it with caution. It doesn't have to be that confusing, the shir tonight. But I want to pose two questions right out in the get-go and see where we go from there. B'ezrat Hashem. Why do tzaddikim, in many cases, tend to pass away very, very young? We have many different situations. We have many different cases like this. Why is it that certain greats were barely here in this world? And needless to say, when we speak about Rabbi Nachman, people that hear about Rabbi Nachman but never heard anything about his life are just shocked when they hear that Rabbi Nachman Breslover, the Rebbe, passed away at the age of 38. So we're going to look at that question. Not that we really can determine exactly what the answer is, but we're going to see something very, very interesting about it. And we're going to learn something about Rabbi Nachman's life, which is quite interesting as well. So you know that before, the days before immunization and antibiotics, antibacterial drugs, so if someone got tuberculosis, oy vey zmir, right? That's mamash it was a bad matzav. And the symptoms for tuberculosis were, it's interesting. It's a lot of correlations to what's going on now. Is just nonstop coughing, fever, sweatiness, and like night sweats, and constant chronic exhaustion. And everyone knows that tuberculosis is something that generally begins in the re'ot, in the lungs area, but it could be spread to the nervous system, to the bones, to skin, to joints, but it starts in the re'ot, it starts in the lungs. We have from Reb Nassim very clear, kind of eerie description of one, like Reb Nachman's coughing attacks that he would have, constant coughing and weakness throughout his illness, the last 2-3 years of his life. In one place, Reb Nassim explains how Rabbi Nachman, you know what? I'll leave that for another shir. Leave it to your own imagination description. But in the world of the tzaddikim, and I'm going to try to be very, very clear here to not, God forbid, get us confused with the way other people perceive this. But in the world of the tzaddikim, their illnesses, their machalot, they're not a personal churban, they're not a personal tragedy, but it's more some kind of a bitui, it's an expression for, on behalf of Am Yisrael as a whole. And you know what? I'm going to ask us all to actually learn what I just said right now, dafka not from a Hasidic text. I want to learn what we just said right now about how tzaddikim and their suffering, and sometimes their death, is an expression of the plight of Am Yisrael as a klal. I want to learn it from the Ramchal, from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in his Sefer Derech Hashem. And you'll see the text in front of you in just a moment. I chose to do this in English because it was just a chaval al azman for us to just try to understand what it is in Hebrew. But look what the Ramchal says. This is really, really interesting. The Ramchal says, pain and suffering may sometimes be imposed on a tzaddik for his entire congregation, for his entire generation. In atoning for them through his suffering, this tzaddik saves them in this world and greatly benefits them in the next. An even higher category of suffering is that which comes to a tzaddik to provide the help necessary to bring about the chain of events leading to mankind's ultimate perfection. Man has to undergo at least some suffering before he and the world can attain perfection. He must be punished for his wickedness until the attribute of justice of tzedek is satisfied. However, Hashem Yitbarach arranged matters in such a way that select perfect individuals can rectify things for others. The only reason they suffer is because of others. Sounds a little bit familiar, right? What, you think this is the only thing that was taken from us? But the way that the Ramchal is saying it, and Rabbi Nachman's going to say it, there's a very important twist over here. The merit and power of these tzaddikim are increased because of such suffering. And this gives them an even greater ability to rectify the damage of others. They can therefore not only rectify their own generation, but can also correct all the spiritual damage from the beginning. Okay, so what is the Ramchal saying over here? This is a very heavy piece over here. The Ramchal is basically saying, it seems to me, right? I can't say this is what he means exactly, but it seems to me that what the Ramchal is saying is that when a tzaddik suffers, it's a kapara for something that you don't see, something that you're unaware of, something much bigger than what you think. And he even said that, like he says in the second paragraph, an even higher category of suffering is that which comes to a tzaddik to provide the help necessary to bring about the chain of events leading to mankind's ultimate perfection. What's mankind's ultimate perfection? Mashiach. Zot omeret, that the Ramchal is saying over here that when a tzaddik Yisod Olam is suffering, at that moment, you really, really have to pay attention because he may be having you in mind at that moment. It may be a kapara over you. You just don't understand it. We don't understand these things. But this can begin to explain to us the concept of holy, holy people suffering tremendously on behalf of Am Yisrael. In the recent virus, there is a very big tzaddik, who's up in Tveria, and that's Rav Dov Cook. Rav Dov Cook. One of the absolutely most pure and refined, righteous tzaddikim that you can imagine. And he is absolutely not in this world. When the corona began, I don't think he went and got contracted, but he did get sick and he was suffering tremendously over this. But it's very hard for us to relate to these kinds of things because today this happens less. Back in the day, these things would happen much, much more. Where you'd have a tzaddik leave the world at a very young age, and you can go throughout the generations like the Arizal, like Rabbi Moshe Cordovero as well, and many other greats that at a young age, they take off. Now, in Rabbi Nachman's case, this is what's very, very interesting. This is like what's really, really out there by Rabbi Nachman. So the question that I want to address tonight, based on what we just saw in the Ramchal and what we're going to continue to see in the writings of Rabbi Nachman, and Shem, you could go out of this text right now. Thank you. What I want to ask is basically, we're all going through something very big right now, and many people have suffered, and perhaps it can be seen that there's some kind of a kapara going on that we can't really understand. The question is, what are we going to define as a healing? Is being healed going to be a simple situation of that there's going to be no more of the illness around? Or will there be something much, much deeper? There's an opportunity that we're given these days, a tremendous opportunity that I want to discuss with you tonight to understand what it is exactly. I mean, does the fact that Nachman himself eventually did succumb to his illness at the age of 38, does that mean that all the healing that he knew of and spoke about were ineffective? You could say so. But the emes is, and I heard this from Rabbi Avram Greenbaum, is that the fact that he died young, it says very little in itself. Because we know that in his 38 years, what he achieved in his 38 years is more than most people can achieve in multiple gilgulim. But we're stuck with this inyan of what about the fact that he did not recover from his tuberculosis? He didn't, it eventually got him. You know, on a very technical level, was it even possible for him back then to have recovered from a disease in those days? Probably, you know, probably not, but Rabbi Nachman believed it was possible. At least in principle, he believed it was possible. And we're going to see tonight, in another place, I think in Sichas Haran, Rabbi Nachman says that he believes that Hashem can, what's the Lashon? He believes Hashem can change a triangle into a square. Because Hashem's ways are hidden from us, meaning based on our limited perception, when there's no vaccine or there's no trufah, then something can't be healed. But Rabbi Nachman wasn't operating on that level. So yes, it's quite unlikely that the medicine that we know of that existed then, that it could have really healed Rabbi Nachman. But that's not the point. And Rabbi Nachman did travel to the town of Lemberg, to Lvov, for very intense tuberculosis treatments that were well documented and spoken of in great detail, which we have a lot of information about it. But what I want to talk about tonight is our refuah, is the refuah of our door in light of how Rabbi Nachman understood it. Again, is healing, am I really healed when the physical pain ends? We know that healing, like the title of the shir, healing, a refuah, to heal something, it means much more than just physical recovery. Many of us have recovered from physical ailments and illnesses, and we don't feel healed, we feel recovered. There's a big difference between the two. When I'm recovered from something, it means that thing perhaps doesn't hurt me. But am I aware of the reason it came to me in the first place? And did I heal that which it was tapping into on a subconscious level? I know this is very, very high. This is a very high concept, but we believe that every time anyone suffers from something physical, there's like a message coming from Shemaim saying, you know, dig deeper. There's something else going on here. Recovery is when is a physical recovery is when it stops hurting me. But a healing is so much deeper. So I go back to the question in the beginning. Did Rabbi Nachman heal himself from tuberculosis? Maybe. Did he recover from it? No. But was he healed from what it brought to him? Yachol liot. Yachol liot. Because real healing means that I live my life to the fullest, up to my last moment in the world. In this sense, Rabbi Nachman was totally healed because he didn't allow his horrible physical pain and all his physical limitations to make him be someone that's not shaykh. And when he had every reason to, when you and I suffer from something that, something physical, where we really do have legitimate reasons to say, you know what, maybe I should attain, maybe I don't have to, I have an excuse to I should just take a break from whatever. Rabbi Nachman didn't let any of that play any role. In fact, we know that this is what's amazing. From the time he goes to Lemberg to start to get treatments for his lungs, Rabbi Nachman, and it's in Likutei Moran Tinyana in the second part. There's 5 or 6 Torahs that Rabbi Nachman is teaching about the functioning of the lungs. He was giving over tons of Torah about the whole system, the whole breathing system. And at those, those ages, so basically from age 36 to 38, he continued his spiritual quest just like he was doing it his whole life. Nothing changed. In fact, he was moving forward as fast as he could because he knew his time was limited. He knew it. But what he did was, and this line I saw somewhere by Avram Greenbaum, it struck me so deep. He said that he was able to turn his actual illness into a means of self-elevation. Now, you and I, Baruch Hashem, as far as I know, we're not sitting in bed right now with Corona. Yeah, as far as I know, right? We're not looking at the Corona and being like, how can I turn this into a self-elevation? I'm thinking more that if someone, God forbid, sick, is like, how do I get this to stop so that I can then do the work that I need to do? But somehow Rabbi Nachman was able, through, while, during, in the midst of the pain, to actually continue to blossom and really be healed by living life to the fullest. And like I said, that some of the greatest tires we have are really from that last period in his life. The famous Torah of Azamra, Reish Pei Bet, 282. Azamra is a great example. Azamra was the teaching that, Rabbi Nachman is very much, he's known for that teaching of finding the good points. When did Rabbi Nachman say that teaching? That was mamish as he was about to leave Breslov to go to Lemberg for treatment, not knowing if he'd ever come back. He didn't know. So what was happening in that time in Rabbi Nachman's life was just some kind of a different speed, just a different speed. And since his machala, the way that we understand it, based on how we learn the Ramchal, is that really his machala was the illness of Am Yisrael. It wasn't possible for his body to fully heal and fully recover. The tikkun can only come about with what eventually happened, which is petira. The concept of the death of tzaddikim being a kapara is not a new concept. We've all heard of that. But the point of tonight's learning is to understand that mamish from Rabbi Nachman's own illness and suffering, he was basically able in a very, very incredible way to open up pathways of mamish healing for you and I. Because you and I know that if we're suffering from something, but we don't allow that suffering to cripple us, and that we could still get out of bed, and that we could still somehow find a place of koach that we really didn't think was stronger than the other side in us, and act upon it, and really believe in the words, Ein shum yeush ba'olam klal. It's not just a nigun we sing, but that it's an actual mantra. It's not a mantra. It could be a mantra, but what it is it's basically an active statement that's chai v'kayim in my midst. You can only lean on the shoulders of someone who was in a state of horrible, horrible pain, coughing up blood quite periodically at the age of 36 and 37, after burying his wife and a few of his children, getting remarried at the age of 35, trying to start over again. And he's the one that's saying, the pathway of healing, no one can take away from you. It's your determination. The recovery, that's more or less up to the Ribono Shel Olam. The healing is too, but the healing is, it's just a different thing that you have a negia to. So I hope we were able so far to explain just the basic essential difference between how we understand the concept of refuah, between healing and recovery. And I think that I speak on behalf of all sincere, authentic, spiritual soul seekers of this generation, that there is a fear right now in the world of going back, of things going back to normal. Why is that a fear? It's the fear is because not because life was so scary back then, but it's because if we got such a makkah on a global level, globally speaking, we got patched so hard. I don't know if that video that went viral today about that, and I'm sure you saw it, there was a little video about this person talking about to his child about the coronavirus, about what it was and how life changed. I don't know if these things are really gonna cause the change to actually take place. So the fear amongst many people is, okay, it seems like the world is on its way to recovery. Kids are starting to go back to school slowly. They're beginning to have a lot of things begin just on the edge of things being back to normal. But the shaila is, was any healing done during this time? And that's what's so interesting right now. Is any healing being taken place? You know, we lost some great Gdolim in this period, mainly in Chutz La'aretz, but even in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Haber, what a tzaddik. What a tzaddik we're talking about. So the mitah of tzaddikim is mechaper, we know that, but we don't want to just rely. I think I speak on behalf of everyone, is that we don't want to just rely on that. We want to be able to feel that we are playing an active role in the healing of Klal Yisrael and essentially the healing of the whole world. Now let's go into Sichos Saran, where we're actually at in Sichos Saran. If you want to open it up, you can open up your Sefer, Sichot Saran Kuf Nun Zayin, 157, and then we're going to see just a few lines in Likutei Moharan. So like I mentioned before, when Rabbi Nachman, the last few years, he kept on speaking about the Machala. He kept on talking about it, about his illness and the teachings. I was looking at some of them today. They're very, very all-encompassing. They're massive. They're just huge Torahs in the functioning of the lungs. I bless us to be able to learn Reb Nachman for many, many, many more years in good health in Mashiach times. And hopefully we'll have the time and the patience to have some of those Torahs go through us. Anyway, look at Sichos Saran Kuf Nun Zayin. The reason why I even brought up this whole story tonight was because this is what we're up to. Reb Nassan says like this, Shamati bishmo she'amar, shekvar amar kama torot al cholat shelo. I heard in his name that Rabbi Nachman said towards the end of his life, I already said a bunch of Torahs on my illness. Ki achai sheba mi Lemberg, hiskir kimat bechol Torah me'inyan hare'ah. From the time he came back from receiving medical treatment in Lemberg, he mentioned the concept of the lungs in almost every teaching that he gave. Shezeh haya ha'cholat shelo. This was his illness. Ki haya lo choli ha'hoist. That's how you say it in Yiddish. Shi'ul shachefet, tuberculosis. Rahman al-Islam, shehu choli hare'ah, which is the illness of the lungs. Now, it's not exactly what's happening today, but it's very much the same area, the same general area. Now, here he says something really interesting, that I'd be really interested, if we were learning live, it'd be much easier to do this. But you have to leave it for the chat for tonight. Ve'amar, and Rabbi Nachman said like this, shekefi ribui hatorot she'amar al zeh, kvar haya ra'ui lihitrapeh. Nachman says, really, because of the amount of Torah that I've already given over on this concept of tuberculosis, I should have already been healed. Very interesting statement. Acha chisaron hu machmat chisaron emunah shel hashomim, she'ein emunatam chazaka kol kach. So what's lacking? Why didn't the power of the Torah that he was teaching, why wasn't there enough healing power in the Torah itself of the lungs? Like usually what we understand is that if I'm learning about something that needs some kind of strengthening and fixing, and I'm learning about it, I'm drawing down Hashem's wisdom, Hashem's koach, Hashem's infinite loving energy into that which needs healing, it should be. that alone, learning about something, should draw down enough shefa of refuah for whatever it is that I'm working on. So the shaila we have, Rabbi Nachman is wondering, he's saying, how could it be that it didn't work? Meaning, I was saying so many Torahs about the lungs. It should have been that with the amount of Torah I was saying about the lungs and about the illness that I have, that it should have been healed. But Rabbi Nachman says really that the blemish, the reason why it didn't really take effect, is because of the lack of emunah from the tzad of those that were listening to the Torahs that I was giving over. She'ein emunatam chazaka kol kach. It must be that their emunah in what I was saying wasn't so strong. Let's put things into perspective. Who is Rabbi Nachman speaking about over here? This is the end of his life. We're probably referring to people that everyone knows that Rabbi Nachman had Hasidim that were much older than him. People that were Hasidim of, I don't think that they were already by the Baal Shem, but definitely Hasidim of previous generations. Also people that were with him for, let's say, 10, 20 years by then. Those are the ones that have chesron emunah in what he was saying and thus causing the Torah to not really take effect. So I was thinking about this a lot. I know this is it's a very difficult statement because, again, what did Rabbi Nachman just say? He said, I could have been healed. In fact, I should have been healed. And the reason why I wasn't healed is because when I said over the Torahs, over the lungs, when you heard me, you didn't really have enough emunah on what I was saying. That's a very big statement. It's impossible. It'd be impossible for me to really understand what the Rebbe was saying. I do want to hear from you how you understand this, but when if I go into my heart right now and try to really hear what Rabbi Nachman is saying beneath, in between the letters, in between the words, I would think like this. Anyone that's in a position of teaching Torah knows. That's kind of what makes Zoom so tricky, is that anyone that's in a position of teaching, of being mashpia, you can be the greatest mashpia in the world. Meaning you can have the potential to be the greatest teacher in the world. But to be the greatest mashpia, to actually be an influencer, is dependent on the receiver. So maybe Rabbi Nachman was saying it's like Shtil Ahet Musar that we was like slipping in towards the end of his life, saying, after all these years, I'm giving you all these Torahs. What do you think the Torahs are meant for? Me just having a podium? You really think I need a podium, Reb Nachman saying? Like that's what's important to me? That I have a place to share my wisdom? Rabbi Nachman doesn't need that. That's not why a soul like this, of this level, came into the world. Every Rav knows, every Rebbitzin knows, every teacher knows, every professor knows that when you are pouring out either your wisdom, but mainly your heart, and it's not being received, it's one of the most painful things in the world. Not that it's not being understood, but that people aren't buying what you're saying, that's really, really difficult. There's another teaching in the Likutei Moharan where Rabbi Nachman explains that this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was kvetching towards the end of his life. When he turns in Parshas Chukas, he turns to the Kahal, and he calls them rebels. Shim'u na hamorim. Hamin hasela hazen otzi lachem mayim, you rebels. All these years I was trying to give over Torahs to you as to how to interact with the Ribono Shleim. And now you're kvetching again. You think it's all about just hitting it? Okay, I'll show you, rebels. And Reb Nachman has a teaching there. Reb Shlomo taught this beautifully, where he's explaining that the frustration of Moshe Rabbeinu was that as a teacher in Am Yisrael, it seemed to him that after all those years of being a faithful shepherd in the desert, they still didn't really, they had a chisaron emunah in his Torah. They loved him. They had moments of believing in him. Vayaminu b'Hashem of Moshe Avdo. They definitely had moments of believing in him. But fully, it was still not there. And that, it seems this is what Rabbi Nachman is saying over here at the end of his life. It could have worked. The Torahs I was giving over about this physical ailment that I was going through, this painful, painful thing, which I chose to look at as an incredible, incredible opportunity to do a tikkun, didn't work. Why? When you heard it, how much did you really think that I was, did you think I lost my marbles yet or not? Okay. So now we're going to a few lines in Likutei Moharan, which will wrap up the shir. This is very interesting. I have it both in Hebrew and in English. The truth is I want to find the notes on this. This is Ches. It's love. Okay. Rabbi Nachman says, "V'da shelefamim hu bechinat neso avon al yedei hakibutz kanal, v'lefamim hu bechinas chas v'shalom achen chalayenu hu nasa." Know that while sometimes forgiveness of sins comes about through the collective merit of the community, there are times when the members of the community are not sufficiently worthy to have their sins forgiven in their own merit. כי כשאין בני הקיבוץ זכאים, אזי אין זוכים לבחינת נשוא עוון. ואז הצדיק מוכרח לקבל על עצמו ייסורים בשביל ישראל. So Reb Nachman says over here, when the members of the community are not sufficiently worthy of having their sins forgiven in their own merit, then the tzaddik is then obliged to undertake to suffer for the sake of the Jewish people. Surely he bore our diseases and carried our pains, Yeshaya Navi says. The community in general is saved from illness, but not the tzaddik, because he undertakes to suffer on behalf of the Jewish people. This teaching that we just read right now, I'm looking for the exact date, as Reb Chaim Kramer usually has this documented in the beginning of the teachings. Sorry about this. Rabbi Nachman taught this lesson on Rosh Hashanah. Of course. Rabbi Nachman taught this lesson on Rosh Hashanah 1810, less than 3 weeks before he passed away. And he delivered this Rosh Hashanah lesson under extremely dire circumstances. He was nearing death. The tuberculosis that racked his body made him so weak that he could barely speak. And Rosh Hashanah was one of the 3 fixed times in the year when the Rebbe's followers would gather by him and he would deliver a major lesson. The other 2 times we all know is Shabbos Chanukah and Shavuos. They also came to Uman the previous Shavuos, but the Rebbe was too ill then to deliver his scheduled lesson. This time, despite the advanced stage of his illness, he delivered this long and intricate teaching. And it's a very long Torah. It speaks about rebuke. It speaks about judgment and prayer and converts, the revelation of Hashem's glory, spreading of prophecy, healing and kapara, and getting close to a true leader. All the things, there's so many of the common things that Reb Nachman spoke about so often in his life. But what you see here, Rabbi Nachman is telling his people, he says, I'm telling you I'm suffering, I'm going through a lot right now. But for me, healing is not only feeling better, but it's realizing that this is part of a much, much bigger picture of life. I always have a feeling that when each of us get Ad Mea V'Esrim to the next world, one of the things that's going to shock our neshamas the most, if this makes any sense, is our concept of time. We allude to this Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. We say, Anu Yameinu Ketzei Lover. Our days are like a passing shadow. We also say this in Tehillim. We say it in Shabbos morning, Ki elef shanim beinecha keyom etmol. 1,000 years in our eyes is for you like yesterday. Ribono Shel Olam. And when we go on to the next world, where it's the Ribono Shel Olam's time, the calculation of the concept of time is different. So here's what I wanted to say, I think. What are one of the things that were created before the concept of time was created? Tshuva. We learned this many times. The concept of tshuva precedes the framework of time in this world. So Rabbi Nachman says, look at me. I'm 38. I'm on my deathbed. A few months ago, I couldn't even open my mouth because I was so sick from the tuberculosis. But I want to tell you about why tzaddikim suffer. When there's not enough merit amongst the kahal, meaning when the congregation doesn't really dig deep inside and do the tshuva that's necessary, the tzaddik then, in order to make sure that we don't all get wiped away, chas v'shalom, he has to take it on and he has to suffer. But what is Rabbi Nachman saying while he's saying those words? He's also saying, Chavra, ein yeush ba'olam klal. If you choose right now to have a burning desire to figure out what you need to work on in this world, the Gemara says, Haba l'taher mesayin lo. You want to come closer and receive some kind of tahara? They will help you. They will extend a hand from Shemayim to you. The question is, are you waiting for someone else to do the job for you or not? Because if someone else does the job for you, it might cost them their life. It might cost them their life. Like Rabbi Nachman is saying without saying, like me. Like me. But I'm choosing to look at this whole episode that we're in life right now differently. I'm choosing to see that really Rabbi Nachman was preparing us for exactly the days that we're in right now. How much emunah do we have in the Torah that you and I are learning? How much emunah do you and I have in the Torah that we're hearing from other people? Because really, the tikkun for all this is really based on that piece that we saw in Sichos Haran, that the amount of good that the Torah can do is dependent on how much emunah there is in the teaching that's being given over. And frankly, friends, we're all teachers. I'm not saying it to sound, it's very true. Like, it used to be that there were only very few people that had something to offer to the klal. That's what it used to be. But today it's not like that. Today, wherever you go, someone has some Torah to tell you. Today, every Shabbos table you get to, there's something to learn from. But it just boils down to how much emunah do you have in what the person in front of you wants to say? Because really, if we have more and more emunah in all the Torah that's coming at us, and there's so much Torah coming at us from so many different corners, so many different angles right now, the more Torah that comes at us and the more we believe in it, then the more the tikkun is doing its job without, God forbid, it having to result in the taking away of lives. So it's an amazing thing. You want to be into pikuach nefesh? How much do you believe in the Torah that's being offered to you? Or how skeptical are you about everything that you hear? So this is great chomer for Likutei Tfilas. Like, this shir is really, it's great. Like, when we say please make a tefillah out of a shir, yeah, I admit sometimes it's a bit harder than others, but we how could we not make a prayer out of tonight's learning? I'll start. Okay, I'm going to start it right now because you know how I feel about this. So Yehi Ratzon Milefanecha Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Aviseinu שלח לנו מנהיג אמיתי שיכוון אותנו אל רצונך בלב אבשלם ותן בליבנו בינה להבין ולהשכיל. Place within us the inner wisdom לשמוע את דבר קודשך מפי כל בריותיך, וכן בחסד ורחמים, to hear the words of your holiness through so many different channels and avenues. ושנזכה לשמוע ולהאמין במה שאנחנו שומעים. And may we believe in what we're hearing. אבל ריבונו של עולם, אל תשלה אותנו בנביאי שקר ובאנשי בצע. Please may it be that the place towards which I'm choosing to open my heart to receive Torah, please may it be real. Please, please may it not be a false, fake, or fraud source. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm willing to go to that vulnerable place of believing in the Torahs that I'm learning for the sake of the refuah of the world. And like Rabbi Nachman said, that every day of Sfiras Omer, if you have very good ears, you can hear that in the depth of every single conversation that exists in the world, people are speaking about the sphera of that specific day. So Ribono Shel Olam, nakeh et ozneinu, clear our ears, ptach et libeinu, behashreh shechinatcha aleinu, may your Shechina come and hover over us. Venizkeh kulanu legeula shlema, geulat hanefesh vegeulat haguf. We should all experience complete salvation, the salvation and redemption of the soul, and the salvation and redemption of the body. Anachnu kol am Yisrael v'kol ha'olam kulo. It's not just us. It's not just a Jewish healing. It's not just a Jewish concept. It's the whole world. Beis HaMikdash is the whole world. V'chen yehi ratzon v'nomar amen. Shimon sent the link in the chat for those of you to submit your tefillas based on tonight's Torah. I also just want to mention that tomorrow night we have a very important event at 8:30. The link will be sent to you. Baruch Hashem, there's been really nice registration until now. And it's a phenomenal session we have with someone very special, Dr. Jacob Friedman, a noted psychiatrist who's, you'll see, it's not your normal gig. It's something very, very interesting in regards to how to be able, Be'ezrat Hashem, to really, really be there for ourselves and for our loved ones. And during this time of crazy stress and trauma, that's tomorrow night at 8:30. So just stay in touch with us. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Shimon, for working behind the desk. Thank you, everyone, for really giving your heart. And please share. Please share your thoughts on tonight's learning. Please submit a tefillah. And yachad anachnu nitchazek. We're going to get stronger. V'nenatzeach. And we're going to win, which doesn't just mean that we're going to recover. We're going to be healed. We're going to be healed. Laila tov, everyone.